Let's begin RTI packet number 4. This packet is going to be due on Friday, January 16th, and the quiz will be on Tuesday, January 20th. And the great thing about at least the first skill is that we've already done this in class earlier this year, and so it should be just a review for you for skill 32. So let's start with skill 32, changing fractions to decimals. Remember that a fraction is another way of writing a division problem. To change a fraction to a decimal, then, we divide the numerator by the denominator. So we said that when something is in fraction form, the numerator, which is the top number, divides by the denominator, which is the bottom number. So in example 1, it says about 1/20th of the heat in a house is lost through the doors. Write this fraction as a decimal. Well, they show us that 1/20th means 1 divided by 20, or if we put it in this division form, we put 1 inside the box and 20 outside the box. They don't actually show us the work, so let's go ahead and show it over here. 20 goes into 1 0 times. 0 times 20 is 0. 1 minus 0 is 1. Decimal point here and straight up. Bring down a 0. 20 goes into 10, 0 times. 0 times 20 is 0. Subtract and you get 10. Pull down a 0. 20 goes into 100 5 times. 5 times 20 is 100. Remainder is 0, so we know that we're finished. So this is the way that they got 5/100ths as the answer, 0.05, by doing the division. The same thing with number 2. We can express 1/3 as a decimal by dividing. So we have 1 inside the box, 3 outside. 3 goes into 1 0 times. Use your decimal point. Pull down a 0. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Pull down a 0. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. And you can start to see the repeating pattern. So we can see that 1/3 is, first of all, a fraction that you should know the answer to without doing the division. But if you don't, you should be able to do it by dividing. So 0.33 or 0.3 repeating. Remember that bar notation means repeating. So let's take a look at some examples at the bottom. Now, when I do the division part, from now on, I'm not going to go through each and every step with you. I'm going to do it on paper, but not explain every step, because by this time you should know how to do the division. But I also want to show you that there is another way to do some of these without doing all of that division work, for those of you who would like to do it in a different way. Anytime you have a denominator that can easily be multiplied by another number to equal 100, you can do this in a different way. So here I know that 25 can easily be multiplied by 4 to become 100. 25 times 4 is 100, so 4 times 4 is 16. One thing that you have to remember then is that anytime you have a denominator of 100, you're talking about a percent. So we have 16%, but we want it to be a decimal, not a percent. So we have an assumed decimal here, and to change a percent to a decimal, we move our decimal point 2 places to the left, and so our decimal is 0.16. So for those of you who feel more comfortable doing it this way, because it does take a little bit less work, you may do that. Same thing with 3/5. First of all, 3/5 is one that we should have memorized. We should know that 3/5 is 60%, or 0.6 as a decimal. But if you don't, you can either divide it, or you can realize that 5 can easily become 100 by multiplying by 20. So we also multiply the numerator by 20, and we get 60. Anytime you have a numerator over 100, you know that you've got a percent. So we have 60%. Take our assumed decimal point, move it 2 places to the left, and we get 0.6 or 0.60. It's just that remember that the zeros on the end do not really matter. So for 7/20, you would multiply by 5, and you get 35 over 100. And then at this point, you should see that that's going to be 0.35 or 35/100ths. If we read it correctly in fraction form, it should be easy to write in decimal form. 3/50 then easily becomes a denominator of 100 by multiplying by 2. So 3 times 2 is 6. Now this one is a little bit tricky because 6 over 100 we know is 6%. We have an assumed decimal point. We're going to move it 1, 2, so we've got to have a placeholder here. So we're going to have 0.06 or 6 100ths. If you read this correctly, this fraction is 6 100ths. In order for your decimal to be 6 100ths, the 6 has to be in the hundredths place, so you know you need a 0 here. Let's take a look at number 5. Here we could easily multiply our denominator and our numerator by 10. When we get to number 6, it's a little different because 7/8, the denominator of 8, cannot be multiplied by any number to become 100. And so we would have to divide. So numerator inside, denominator outside. Now again, 7/8 is one of those fractions that you should know or memorize, and you should know that it's going to be 0.875. But if you don't, go ahead and multiply it out. Now remember, I'm not going through each step with you. You can write them down. You should know this point how to divide. And once you've done that division, you get your decimal of 875 1,000ths, or 0.875. Now that we've completed the problems together, let's go ahead and turn to page 64 for the homework. Okay, on page 64, there are a few problems that I want you to do. Problem 13, 14, 15, 22, 24, 27, and 28. But before you do those, I want to look at 26 together, because if you notice, on 22 and 26, the denominator is greater than 100. So let's see what happens when we have a denominator greater than 100. First of all, we have 3 over 150. So we're going to take our numerator and divide it by our denominator. So think to yourself whether or not you're going to have a really small decimal or a really big decimal. Let's look at it. So 150 goes into 3 0 times. We'll go ahead and do the work. Pull down our 0. 150 goes into 30 0 times. We'll pull down another 0. 150 goes into 300 2 times. 2 times 150 is 300. And so we can see that our decimal is 0.02. So you can do them the exact same way as you learned with the division as the others, but the decimal is going to be really small because here we have 0.02 or 2 100ths. So go ahead and work the problems that I've circled, and when you complete those, you can move on to skill 33.